It started with a sealed legal envelope delivered quietly through a side entrance at Kensington Palace. An envelope that reportedly carried the one confirmation the royal household had spent decades avoiding. Princess Catherine's expression after reading those solicitor documents stunned even veteran palace aides. Because this was never supposed to become public. Not now. Not while old royal rivalries were already tearing the monarchy apart. And at the center of it all stood one legendary royal artifact. The Spencer Tiara. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. For years, whispers surrounding Princess Diana's private wishes had drifted through palace corridors like something half-buried and too dangerous to confront directly. Most aides dismissed those rumors as aristocratic folklore, the kind of story repeated quietly during private dinners, but never acknowledged openly by senior members of the monarchy. But according to reports now emerging from royal legal circles, palace solicitors allegedly uncovered documents and correspondence suggesting Diana privately envisioned Catherine, Princess of Wales, as the future bearer of the Spencer Tiara, a decision that insiders claim sent shockwaves through several royal households at once. What made the revelation so explosive was not simply the emotional connection between Catherine and Diana. It was the timing. Because these discussions reportedly surfaced during highly sensitive inheritance conversations already, unfolding behind closed doors, while the monarchy struggled to maintain stability amid growing internal divisions. Those familiar with Kensington Palace operations claim Catherine initially said almost nothing after reading the documents. And that silence frightened people more than outrage ever could. Senior aides reportedly scrambled behind the scenes as word of the solicitor confirmation quietly spread through administrative offices tied to both Kensington Palace and Clarence House. One insider allegedly described the atmosphere as cold panic, with multiple factions inside the institution suddenly realizing that a deeply symbolic piece connected to Diana's memory might now reignite unresolved tensions that had never truly disappeared after her death. Questions reportedly flooded private meetings almost immediately. Why had this remained hidden for so many years? Who already knew? And perhaps most unsettling of all, why was the information surfacing now, during one of the monarchy's most fragile periods in recent memory? Prince William, according to various palace sources, became intensely protective of Catherine the moment the story began circulating internally. Reports suggest he viewed the matter not as a glamorous inheritance dispute, but as something far more personal and emotionally dangerous. Because Diana's legacy inside the royal family has never existed as simple history. It remains emotional territory, painful territory, territory capable of reopening old fractures between loyalty, memory, and power. Several insiders claim William privately feared that public discussion surrounding the tiara could quickly spiral into another media war centered on Diana's symbolic place within the monarchy and whether Catherine had now become the living continuation of the role Diana once occupied in the hearts of the public. As the days passed, the silence only deepened the mystery. Catherine reportedly canceled a planned appearance without detailed explanation, immediately intensifying speculation about NG royal correspondents and tabloid editors. Media insiders began quietly suggesting that something significant had shifted inside palace walls weeks earlier, long before the public caught even the faintest hint of the unfolding situation. Even veteran royal reporters allegedly noticed unusual patterns. Aides refusing comment, legal representatives avoiding routine clarifications, and certain senior courtiers suddenly becoming unreachable. According to whispers now circulating through aristocratic circles, the palace's greatest fear was no longer the tiara itself. It was the emotional narrative attached to it. Because if Diana truly intended Catherine to inherit one of the most iconic symbols tied to her legacy, then the monarchy was no longer dealing with a forgotten inheritance matter. It was confronting the possibility that Diana had quietly shaped the future of the crown long before anyone realized what she was doing. But the real shock wasn't the tiara itself. It was the growing fear that Diana may have anticipated this royal battle decades before it ever began. Long before Catherine ever entered royal life, Princess Diana reportedly understood one brutal truth about the monarch. Hi, Jewels were never just jewels. They were symbols of legitimacy, survival, and power. And according to whispers now echoing through aristocratic circles, Diana may have quietly prepared for a future confrontation no one believed would actually arrive. The Spencer Tiara was never merely an heirloom resting inside an aristocratic collection. To the Spencer family, it represented bloodline continuity, ancestral prestige, and the enduring identity of one of Britain's oldest noble houses. But to Diana, insiders claim, the tiara eventually became something far more emotional than ceremonial tradition. During the darkest years of her marriage into the royal family, she was a strong and determined woman. Reports suggest she viewed the piece almost as a reminder of who she had once been before palace protocol, relentless scrutiny. And emotional isolation transformed her life into something far more painful than the public ever fully understood. Royal historians have long pointed out that Diana frequently returned, emotionally and symbolically, to her Spencer roots whenever tensions inside the monarchy became unbearable. And now, according to those close to aristocratic legal circles, whispers are growing louder that Diana may have quietly connected the future of that legacy not to institutions, but to a person she believed would one day protect it from becoming politicized inside palace walls. That person many now believe was Catherine. The comparison between Catherine, Princess of Wales, and Diana has followed the monarchy for years. But insiders claim the solicitor revelations transformed those comparisons into something far more serious and emotionally charged. Suddenly, commentators were no longer discussing style, popularity, or public image. They were discussing inheritance, trust, symbolic succession. Reports began surfacing suggesting Diana privately admired qualities she believed the monarchy desperately needed in the future: restraint, composure, discipline, and a willingness to endure pressure without publicly attacking the institution itself. Those close to William reportedly insist Diana always feared the possibility that future royal conflicts could drag deeply personal heirlooms into battles over status and influence. And according to whispers circulating through palace-adjacent circles, she may have quietly believed that William's future wife would eventually become the guardian of the emotional legacy she could no longer protect herself. That possibility has reportedly sent shockwaves through certain royal discussions, because it raises deeply uncomfortable questions about ownership versus intention. Palace legal advisors are said to be quietly debating whether verbal wishes tied to private family inheritance can carry moral authority even when official institutional structures remain deliberately vague. And behind those conversations sits an even more explosive fear: that Diana anticipated future tensions involving what insiders carefully describe as outsider influence over the monarchy's most emotionally sensitive symbols. Royal commentators have increasingly speculated that Diana's experiences inside the institution left her deeply protective over anything connected to her son's future identities. Some now believe she feared a time would come when preserving her legacy might require someone within the next royal generation to quietly defend it from competing agendas. For Catherine, however, the emotional burden reportedly became overwhelming. Sources close to Kensington Palace claim she spent hours reviewing archival family correspondence connected to Diana and William, growing visibly emotional as forgotten details resurfaced. Those who allegedly witnessed her reaction insist this was never about glamour or prestige. It was about understanding the emotional responsibility now being attached to Diana's memory. And perhaps for the first time since marrying into the monarchy, Catherine reportedly realized the true scale of what Diana may have entrusted to her: not simply a tiara, but a continuation of legacy itself. A legacy still capable of dividing households, reopening old wounds, and reshaping fragile royal alliances decades after Diana's death. But while Catherine tried to process the emotional weight of Diana's reported decision, another royal household was already reacting with fury behind closed doors. By the time whispers reached Clarence's house, insiders claimed the atmosphere inside royal corridors had turned icy, because this was no longer simply about inheritance. It was about influence, status, visibility, and who would ultimately define Princess Diana's lasting place inside the modern monarchy. According to reports now circulating through palace circles, The solicitor revelations triggered immediate divisions among senior row. Yale figures already struggling to maintain unity behind closed doors. What began as a quiet inheritance discussion allegedly evolved into a far more dangerous internal conflict over symbolism and public perception. Because those familiar with royal operations understood something instantly. If Catherine became publicly associated with Diana's personal legacy on this level, the balance of emotional influence inside the monarchy could shift dramatically. And for some within the institution, that possibility reportedly created enormous unease. Insiders claim emergency conversations quietly unfolded between advisors attached to multiple royal households as officials debated how the story should be handled before it spiraled beyond their control. Some allegedly argued for silence. Others feared silence itself was already becoming politically damaging. But beneath every discussion sat the same uncomfortable realization: the palace was once again being pulled back into the emotional gravity of Diana's memory. Nowhere, according to whispers, was that tension reportedly felt more sharply than among allies connected to Queen Camilla's circle. Sources close to aristocratic social networks claim. A growing concern emerged almost immediately over renewed public comparisons between Diana and Catherine dominating headlines once again. For years, palace strategists had carefully attempted to stabilize the monarchy by shifting focus away from the emotional divisions left behind after Diana's death. But suddenly, according to royal commentators, the Spencer Tiara controversy threatened to undo years of quiet image management in a matter of days. Because the public was no longer simply remembering Diana nostalgically. They were beginning to ask whether Catherine had become the woman Diana herself trusted to continue her symbolic place within the future monarchy. That narrative reportedly alarmed several senior figures. Palace aides were allegedly instructed to avoid discussing the tiara situation with journalists entirely, even off the record. Veteran royal correspondents soon noticed the unusual silence. Calls stopped being returned. Routine briefings reportedly became tense and abbreviated. According to insiders, legal advisors warned that any careless statement could intensify public speculation and transform a private inheritance discussion into a constitutional-style emotion. A crisis for the institution. But despite attempts to contain the situation, the silence only deepened public fascination. And as official voices disappeared, outside commentators filled the vacuum with increasingly emotional interpretations of what Diana may have intended. At the center of it all stood William. Reports suggest the Prince of Wales became quietly determined to ensure Catherine was treated not merely as his wife, but as the symbolic continuation of the stability and compassion Diana once represented to millions. Those close to palace dynamics claim William viewed the matter as deeply personal rather than strategic. Yet insiders also insist he understood the larger implications unfolding around them. Because royal symbolism matters. Titles matter. Legacy matters. And according to some historians now weighing in publicly, the monarchy has always depended as much on emotional inheritance as legal inheritance. Several royal experts even revived long-standing debates surrounding protocol, heirlooms, and the unwritten rules governing items tied to Diana's public identity. Questions resurfaced about whether emotional legitimacy could eventually outweigh institutional convene. Science in the eyes of the public. Meanwhile, sympathy toward Catherine reportedly intensified by the hour. Her silence, rather than weakening her position, appeared to strengthen it. Many observers interpreted her restraint as dignity under pressure, especially as rumors spread that she had become deeply emotional while reviewing archival correspondence connected to Diana's wishes. And perhaps most damaging for palace officials trying to calm tensions was the growing perception that Catherine had not pursued this legacy for herself. It had allegedly been entrusted to her. That distinction changed everything. Because suddenly the conversation was no longer about privilege. It was about responsibility. And according to reports emerging from legal circles, advisors quietly warned senior royals that further escalation could trigger consequences far beyond a temporary media storm. But then Catherine did something few expected after days of silence. She finally decided to respond. When Catherine finally spoke, palace insiders say the room fell completely silent. Because her response reportedly wasn't triumphant. It wasn't boastful. And it certainly wasn't political. Instead, what emerged was something far more devastating, a deeply personal acknowledgement of Princess Diana, legacy, motherhood, and the unbearable weight of royal expectation. According to those familiar with the atmosphere surrounding the palace at the time, many had anticipated a carefully calculated statement shaped by advisors, lawyers, and media strategists desperate to contain the growing storm. But insiders claim Catherine approached the situation very differently. Rather than focusing on ownership, entitlement, or inheritance, she reportedly framed the entire matter around one emotional principle: honoring Diana's memory with dignity. That distinction immediately altered the tone of the crisis. Because until that moment, whispers surrounding the Spencer Tiara had become tangled in palace politics, competing loyalties, and silent tensions between royal households. Yet Catherine, according to sources close to Kensington Palace, refused to treat the issue as a victory or a public claim. Reports suggest she viewed the situation with a kind of emotional caution that deeply affected even hardened palace staff accustomed to royal controversies. One aide allegedly described her response as painfully restrained, not because she lacked emotion, but because she understood exactly how dangerous unchecked emotion could become inside the monarchy. That restraint reportedly earned widespread admiration behind palace walls. For days, tensions had escalated quietly as advisors feared the situation could evolve into another prolonged public conflict tied to Diana's legacy. But Catherine's approach appeared to interrupt that spiral, at least temporarily. Staff members allegedly observed that she remained focused not on symbolism for herself, but on protecting stability for William and their children, while still respecting Diana's emotional place within royal history. According to insiders, that balance proved extraordinarily difficult to maintain, because every word connected to Diana still carries emotional consequences inside the institution. Every comparison reopens old wounds. Every public reaction risks pulling the monarchy backward into unresolved grief and division. Yet Catherine reportedly understood something crucial that many around her did not. The public was watching not simply for answers but for emotional sincerity. And for many observers, her response delivered exactly 10. Prince William, according to reports, was deeply moved by how Catherine handled the pressure. Those close to the Prince of Wales claim he had grown increasingly concerned over the emotional toll the controversy was taking on her privately, especially as media speculation intensified and old tensions surrounding Diana returned to the center of royal conversation. But insiders suggest Catherine's calm response reassured him in ways palace officials had failed to do. Several royal commentators even began comparing her composure to the crisis management style long associated with Queen Elizabeth II herself, a measured refusal to escalate public emotion, despite enormous personal strain behind closed doors. That comparison only intensified public fascination surrounding Catherine's connection to Diana. Because suddenly, many royal watchers were no longer seeing Catherine simply as William's wife or future queen. They were beginning to see her as the figure carrying two emotional legacies at once: Diana's compassion and Elizabeth's discipline. And according to insiders, Catherine privately resisted every attempt to transform the situation into a larger public dispute. Reports claim ADV. Ears floated various strategies for clarifying the palace position more aggressively, but she allegedly refused to fuel further division. That decision reportedly surprised several senior figures who expected the pressure campaign surrounding the tiara to continue escalating. Instead, Catherine's silence after her initial response became deliberate rather than uncertain. She reportedly understood that the more emotionally charged the public conversation became, the more dangerous the institutional consequences could become for everyone involved. For a brief moment, tensions inside royal corridors appeared to cool. The palace regained a fragile sense of calm. Media speculation slowed slightly. Even rival factions reportedly pulled back from further confrontation as Catherine's restrained. Handling of the matter shifted public attention away from conflict and toward emotional legacy instead. But even as Catherine tried to lower the temperature, hidden legal questions surrounding the Spencer inheritance were only beginning to emerge. Behind the emotional headlines sat something far more explosive: paperwork. old legal records, confidential consultations, and according to Royal Insider, documents that may completely reshape public understanding of Diana's intentions toward William's future family. What frightened palace officials most, reports suggest, was not the emotional symbolism surrounding the Spencer tiara anymore. It was the possibility that written evidence might exist showing Diana had quietly outlined personal wishes regarding multiple heirlooms tied to her legacy. According to sources familiar with aristocratic legal consultations, solicitors allegedly began revisiting decades-old correspondence connected to Diana's private estate discussions shortly after the inheritance controversy erupted internally. Those reviews reportedly included handwritten notes, archived legal summaries, and confidential conversations preserved through old advisory records connected to both Spencer family representatives and royal legal intermediaries. And while no official confirmation ever surfaced publicly, whispers inside royal circles grew increasingly intense as speculation spread that the tiara might not be the only emotionally significant item Diana intended to protect for William's future household. That possibility reportedly triggered a deeper and far more dangerous ruse debate behind closed doors, one centered on authority itself. Because as legal advisors quietly examined the situation, a complicated question emerged. Did moral intention carry weight against institutional ownership structures carefully maintained by the monarchy for generations? According to royal commentators, this became the dividing line inside private discussions. Some insiders allegedly argued that heirlooms emotionally associated with Diana belonged within the broader royal institution regardless of personal wishes. Others insisted Diana's connection to the Spencer bloodline gave her private intentions extraordinary symbolic importance, especially concerning items deeply tied to her identity before and after her marriage into the crown. Suddenly, the conversation was no longer confined to a single tiara. It had evolved into a confrontation between aristocratic family legacy and the monarchy's instinct to preserve centralized control over royal symbolism. As those tensions escalated quietly in legal circles, media speculation intensified outside palace walls. Commentators began openly questioning whether additional heirlooms, personal letters, or symbolic artifacts connect. Cited to Diana may also have been privately designated in ways the public never understood. Royal historians revisited old interviews, forgotten anecdotes, and fragments of past reporting searching for clues hidden in plain sight. Some even speculated that Diana, fully aware of how emotionally powerful royal symbolism could become after her death, may have attempted to preserve certain elements of her legacy through quiet verbal understandings rather than formal public declarations. Palace lawyers, according to insiders, immediately recognized the danger of those theories spreading unchecked. Because once public imagination attached itself to the idea of hidden wishes, every unresolved detail surrounding Diana's possessions suddenly became potential fuel for another institutional crisis. Behind the scenes, reports suggest legal teams worked aggressively to contain the growing frenzy. Advisors allegedly warned senior royals that public disputes over Diana-linked heirlooms could rapidly destabilize fragile efforts to modernize the monarchy's image. Yet despite those efforts, one narrative kept gaining strength among both commentators and the public. William was increasingly being viewed not merely as Diana's son, but as the protector of her unfinished legacy. And by extension, Catherine was beginning to appear less like an outsider entering the royal family, and more like the figure entrusted to preserve something emotionally sacred within it. That shift reportedly carried enormous symbolic consequences. Because the more public sympathy moved toward William and Catherine, the harder it became for palace strategists to frame the issue as a routine legal matter, rather than a deeply emotional continuation of Diana's story. Sources close to Kensington Palace claim Catherine was quietly urged by advisors to avoid wearing the Spencer tiara publicly for now, despite the growing speculation surrounding it. Officially, insiders insist the recommendation was about reducing unnecessary media escalation. But privately, many interpreted the decision differently. Because according to whispers spreading through royal households, there was growing fear that a single public appearance featuring the tiara could instantly transform a controlled inheritance discussion into a global symbolic event impossible for the palace to contain. And perhaps most unsettling of all was the realization quietly taking hold among senior figures. This controversy no longer felt isolated. Reports increasingly suggested it might only be the beginning of a far wider inheritance conflict tied to Diana's legacy, one capable of reopening old divisions the monarchy had spent decades trying to bury. And as the palace struggled to contain the storm, one final realization began spreading through royal circles: Diana's influence inside the monarchy had never truly disappeared. For years, royal strategists believed time would soften Diana's shadow over the monarchy. But according to those now watching this crisis unfold, the opposite may have happened. Because through Catherine, through William, and now through the Spencer Tiara itself, Diana's legacy reportedly returned stronger than ever and far more impossible to control. What began as a quiet legal revelation had slowly transformed into something much larger than anyone inside palace walls expected. Because somewhere between the solicitor documents, the silent tensions, and Catherine's restrained response, the public mood had shifted dramatically. Royal insiders claim many people no longer viewed Catherine simply as the future queen. And beside William, increasingly, she was being seen as the emotional continuation of the values Diana once represented: compassion under pressure, dignity during scrutiny, and quiet endurance inside an institution often accused of emotional coldness. According to commentators following the controversy closely, that transformation carried enormous symbolic weight. Because for decades, Diana's place within royal history remained emotionally unfinished, suspended between tragedy and legacy. But now, through Catherine, many observers believed the public had finally found a figure capable of carrying that connection forward without reopening the chaos that once surrounded Diana herself. That growing perception reportedly strengthened public support around both William and Catherine in ways palace strategists had not fully anticipated. Polling discussions, media commentary, and insider analysis increasingly pointed toward the same conclusion. The controversy surrounding the Spencer Tiara had not weakened their position. It had reinforced it. According to reports, many members of the public interpreted Catherine's restraint as evidence of authenticity rather than calculation. Meanwhile, Liam's fierce protectiveness over both Catherine and Diana's legacy reportedly deepened sympathy toward him as well. Royal historians even began describing the moment as symbolic of something larger than inheritance. Some insiders allegedly referred to it as a transfer of trust between generations, a moment where the emotional responsibility Diana carried throughout her life appeared to settle quietly onto William and Catherine together. And for the monarchy, that emotional transition may have carried consequences far beyond a single heirloom. Yet even as public support intensified, unease reportedly spread through senior royal circles. Because the deeper this story reached into Diana's personal legacy, the more palace officials feared what else might eventually surface. Questions reportedly remained unresolved behind closed doors regarding old correspondence, verbal understandings, and private wishes Diana may have shared before her death. Some commentators openly speculated whether additional heirlooms or symbolic possessions were more important than the original. Connected to Diana's identity could someday become part of similar inheritance debates. Others warned that the monarchy risked losing control over how Diana's memory would continue shaping public perception of future generations. According to insiders, that fear has become particularly sensitive because comparisons between past and present royal eras are no longer fading with time, they are intensifying. And with every comparison between Catherine and Diana, the institution reportedly finds itself confronting painful questions it once believed history had buried permanently. The Spencer Tiara itself has now become something much larger than jewelry. It reportedly evolved into a symbol of legitimacy, continuity, and unresolved royal history all at once. To some, it represents Diana's enduring emotional connection to the public. To others, it symbolizes William and Catherine's growing role as protectors of a modernized monarchy still haunted by the consequences of its past decisions. But perhaps most importantly, according to royal observers, the tiara became proof that legacy inside the monarchy cannot simply be managed through silence, protocol, or carefully crafted statements. Emotional truth has a way of surviving. And Diana's influence, despite decades of institutional caution, appears to have survived more powerfully than anyone expected. Because long after the headlines faded and the official ceremonies moved forward, the emotional bond between Diana, William, Catherine, and the public never truly disappeared. It simply waited quietly beneath the surface until the right moment forced it back into the light again. And perhaps that is the most unsettling realization for the palace itself. That despite all the years spent stabilizing the monarchy after Diana's death, despite every effort to move beyond old divisions and painful memories, her presence still shapes the emotional heartbeat of the institution. Through William, through Catherine, through the public that never stopped seeing Diana as something more than a royal figure. She became memory, grief, compassion, rebellion, and hope all at once. And now, according to those watching this latest controversy unfold, that legacy may have quietly secured its place inside the future of the crown itself. Because in the end, the palace may have tried to protect the silence, but silence was never strong enough to erase Princess Diana's legacy. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.